Hey folks, Fernando in our video for Modern Survivalists, and in this case we're going to be looking into the history of one of the most famous US military knives ever, the M9 Bayonet, which is this beautiful blade that you see here. You've probably seen it in video games as well, if you play those. I think it's Counter-Strike or some of those, but you probably know about the M9. Now, do you know the real history behind how the M9 came to be? Probably not. I haven't actually seen a proper video going throughout the entire process of how this ended up being created. At least I haven't seen it, so let's get to it. In one of my previous videos, I talked about the Bowie knife, right? I think it's also good to, if you're into firearms, if you're into knives, it's also nice to know the history and the why of things, all right? Sometimes people think they know, many times it's not so much, and it kind of sucks when people repeat old wives' tales that don't have much to go for. So the history of the M9 starts probably first of all with a Bowie in terms of the traditional clip point, big knife and such, but most of all with Rambo, with the movie Sylvester Stallone. 1982, Rambo First Blood hits the theaters, but before that, Sylvester Stallone, you probably know, is, or maybe you don't, but Sylvester Stallone is a very big firearms and knives enthusiast and collector, and the guy has a huge collection, and the guy knows his guns and his knives. And he was very much involved in Rambo, and Sylvester Stallone approached Jimmy Lyle, one of the most famous blacksmiths of his time, and he was a guy mostly dedicated to big survival knives like that. So Sylvester Stallone approaches Jimmy Lyle and tells him, you know what, I need a knife for this movie. I need a survivalist knife, like this special operation guy that he survives everything, and he has this big ass cool super knife. But beyond that, he said, Sylvester Stallone, I want a real knife. Don't give me any bull crap about something that looks good in screen. You know, when it comes to Hollywood movies, the hero gun, and I talked about this before, the hero gun is the gun or the firearm or the tool used by the hero of the movie, of the story. It will be, for example, in The Walking Dead, the Colt Python is the hero's gun. It has to look good on close-ups. It has to have a certain aesthetic presence. It has to look the part. So many of these are, for example, a Han Solo blaster. It's a Mauser with a few things going on there, but it's not a real thing, but it is a hero gun. Sylvester Stallone wanted a hero knife, but he also wanted a real survivalist knife, or a real survival knife, something that someone could actually use for that kind of mission. And in fact, Jimmy Lyle uses the knife from The Mission series. The First Blood knife was something designed to actually be used. So, and if you want it, you can actually go into Jimmy Lyle's website.com. You will find the First Blood knife. If you have $2,000, you can buy it, and it's gonna be this exact. No, it's not this knife, of course, but in this cheap Chinese knockoff that actually says Rambo, you do have some of the essentials of what makes the Rambo knife, which is this saw on the back, which lots of traditionalists just lost their minds over. That is stupid, a knife with a saw back, that doesn't make any sense. Well, it actually worked, so it wasn't all that wrong. Jimmy Lyle actually got that right, because it does work, especially in a bigger knife. And as we're going to be seeing, many knives adopted that later on. The hollow handle, and in the case of the First Blood one, it had a screwdriver in the cross piece, a flat and Phillips screwdriver there as well. Okay, and yeah, this is the kind of thing that was copied time and again, and you know, countless knockoffs like this knife came after that. Rambo is a movie that invigorated the market of knives for the entire industry in a way unseen before. All of a sudden, everyone wanted either a Rambo knife or something similar to a Rambo knife, and you know, knockoffs and actual manufacturers started borrowing from that. Here I have an Aitor knife made in Spain. This is a real deal issue knife. It's been used in different armed forces around the world. This is a Jungle King 2. You have the larger Jungle King 1 and the 3, which is smaller, but you have the same elements of the Rambo knife. You have the hollow handle, you have the saw there in the back, and sure, it has a little bit of kit there in the sheath there, but this is a no-nonsense real survival issue knife. This thing cuts like you wouldn't believe, and it is super solid and tough. A lot of people think that because of the hollow handle, the knife will just fall apart. Even in the crappy Chinese knockoffs, I was given this when I was 10 years old. This is junk, and it still it withstood all the use and abuse I could give it in ways that I never would have imagined. And it is the cheapest knockoff you could think of. Something like this, an actual real manufacturer quality made Aitor knife, forget about it. It is as tough as you could think of. You're going to be breaking the blade before you break this, in spite of the hollow handle. Now, having said all of this, and having made a point about the importance of the Rambo knife, in 1981, Qual Attack is created. Charles Mickey Finn associates with a lawyer friends of his, and he creates a company called Qual Attack. What does Qual Attack does? Well, the idea was to make a small company, nothing big, just a small company, a few people, creating products for the U.S. military special forces. This was before SOCOM came into the picture. So, special forces. Our friend Mickey Finn thinking of things he can develop and sell and make a bit of money with that company. One of the things he wanted to do was offer a knife for the Navy SEALs, and for that he inspires in some of those Rambo knives. He actually purchases first Rambo knives, the 3 knives from the first 3 Rambo movies. So with those knives, he starts working on, Qual Attack starts working on their own design for a U.S. Navy SEAL knife. And they end up designing and coming up with this knife. This is the Buckmaster, also known as Buck 184. Now, Qual Attack, as I said, was a small company, and they didn't have actual production. So they associate with Buck, and for that they create a separate company called Phrobis, and through Phrobis they actually make this knife, and it's Buck that's making it for them. And this association works very well because, as we were saying before, Qual Attack was something working on the underground, making stuff like James Bond 007 kind of stuff for special forces, and at the same time Buck wanted new knives as to fulfill that need and the new need in the market of people that wanted a survival knife, right? And inspired heavily on those Rambo knives. And this definitely did the ticket. It was an impressive looking blade. And yeah, the way in which they started, well, as you see, it's a clip point saw in the back, and instead of having screwdrivers and such, it has this a little bit of a weird thing going on. This was actually requested by the Navy SEALs. They wanted some form of anchor so as to attach some of the diving equipment underneath piers and such. So this is the sheath. Very interesting how it started using polymer, which was not as common for sheets. And you have a sharpening stone underneath there. So this was all Finn's design. Now, having said that, it is a great knife. Yeah, it is, cuts very well, very nicely, super sharp, 7mm wide. This is over a 1/4 inch thick blade. It has this little bit of a weird saw thing going on, and then a different kind of saw here. Just a few things are a bit out there. Now, the big problem, and this was actually used, there's a couple pictures of Navy SEALs, or at least one Navy SEAL seen having this in the belt. So at some point it was used, at least. It didn't become very successful because of a few things. First of all, this is going to be an expensive knife. It is forged in a single piece. It's very tough, very strong, but it's expensive to make this knife. You're not going to be breaking the hollow handle or anything like that, but this forged blade, it's not cheap at all. Besides that, the weight. This is a heavy knife. Of course, if you're going to be using it, you remove these attachments and such, but the weight also kills it in terms of how much people want to carry it. And finally, this gnarled grip, it's just awful. It just feels so aggressive in your hand, and imagine if you have wet palms, this is going to be tearing through your skin. I've seen some pictures in which this was, something was there around it, some kind of materials has to make this a little bit bearable, but those would be, in spite of how strong and solid it is, this would be one of those things in which this knife just had a very short history. And besides, it became fairly popular. It was, it counterfeited a lot. There was a bunch of copies from Asia coming in from Mexico as well, and that basically killed it as a knife. But it never made it as a military issue knife. So 1984, we have the Buckmaster. Now, a couple years later, the US military is looking for a new bayonet knife. And our pal, Mickey Finn, says, wait a moment, I have a very cool knife. I'll just work on that a little bit and make it a bayonet. And ends up being just that. He borrows some of the basic geometry of the knife and then borrows the bayonet attachment from the M7. Instead of having the hollow handle, it's just a plastic handle with a tang that screws here, and you have an Allen here that keeps it all in place, and the M9 is created. Now again, Qual Attack did not have their own building facility. They designed this, they researched and designed these things, but they yet again associate with Buck, and for that they create a company called Phrobis 3. So with Phrobis 3, they start making their first knives through Buck. And that's how it came to be the Buck knife. Now, a few years later, Phrobis falls off favor with Buck. They end up splitting. Buck ends up holding on to the patent for the M9 and keeps on making the M9. Phrobis now goes looking for a different manufacturer, and with a fourth company, Phrobis International, they associate with Marto in Spain, Toledo, well-known, centuries-old city of making knives, one of the most traditional knife-making cities in the planet. In Toledo, they start making these Marto knives for Phrobis International using that same design. It's called the M9A1. I believe the M9A1 was the original designation, and this is the knife they end up making. They also make, for the European market, they actually allow Marto to put their name there. So you have the M9 Marto, Phrobis International, and this, curiously enough, it doesn't have the bayonet attachment, so this would be like a fighting utility knife rather than an actual bayonet. There's a model called the M11, which would pretty much be the same thing because it's very similar in terms of having the hammer here instead of the, a hammer instead of the bayonet attachment, and that's the knife. Marto M9. Very good knives. I mean, these are very well made, not super sharp. I see that there's a little bit of a burr there, of a wire edge, which could have been a little bit better, but it's something that if you work on a little bit, you just feel it. A little bit of a tiny burr there, just should be easy enough to remove it. But once you remove that, it's actually a very decent knife. As you see the quality, one of the things you look into when you look at the quality of these knives, any knife in general, you look at some of those bevels, if the point meets exactly where it's supposed to. Let me see if I can get a closer focus there. So you see those bevels. This is the kind of thing that speaks of quality construction in general. So you have that wire cutter that they implement. The wire cutter was borrowed from the Russian bayonet. It actually works okay, apparently. Some people say this ends up breaking eventually. Some people say it's fine. And one of the weirdest thing would be the saw here in the back. These were designed also as to cut wood, but supposedly so as to cut through the metal of an airplane after a crash. If you have to cut through that metal fuselage, this would be, in theory, working for that for that purpose. But, you know, nice knife. Mickey Finn works in a couple more designs with Marto. He ends up making the modular utility knife, which is something very similar to the M9, but smaller. And there's a version of this which has this kind of handle, and that was intended, yet again, to be used by Navy SEALs. Seems that Mickey Finn was obsessed with getting his knife used by the Navy SEALs. I guess that's going to be more of a marketing thing for him and business strategy, but it's not adopted because it doesn't end up working so well. He does make the light version of that modular knife, field utility knife, I think it's called. I did a video on this. It's actually quite good, and it's pretty strong and sturdy for what it is, for such a light knife. So yeah, I like it a lot. I think he had something going on there. Mickey Finn had a good idea on knife designs in general. So guys, this is the story of the M9 Bayonet. Now you understand why it is. Now when someone says, oh, that's a stupid Rambo knife, yeah, the stupid Rambo knife is designed by one of the best bladesmiths that ever designed a knife at all. So a little bit more respect for the good old Rambo First Blood knife. Folks, I hope you enjoy this. Subscribe to the channel so as to not miss any of this fantastic content I'm putting out there for you. See you next time. Have a great day.